This is the Big Small Business Show. Welcome back, and we continue our discussion with Pieter Faber and Sharon Smulders from SAICA. And we've been talking before the break around the recent budget speech and how that affects us as small business. Now we're going to move on to SONA. The one thing that I picked up in the SONA speech was seemed to be an emphasis on youth employment. Once again, there was a bit of talk around small business, but not as much as I've heard in previous years. There seemed to be, are we not flavor of the month anymore? Like what's happening?
I think what's happening is dealing with small business as a, call it, scattered voice is very difficult. So when you set yourself targets of 1 million jobs, etc., it's actually a lot easier to do that with big business. Like we saw the president 2 years ago going to big business with his youth employment scheme. But once again, from a coherent policy point of view, I think we have to actually start forcing the hand and saying, but if small businesses are important, then the employment should be through small business. And there are certain entrepreneurial skills, etc., that these people just won't learn at big businesses that they would necessarily learn at smaller businesses. So in that mind, employment, youth employment, I think it's once again a thing that the scattered small business voice, and I think that's probably one of anything you need to actually create a platform. You don't have a SACU or a SACI speaking on behalf of small business.
What I'm also not seeing, though, is that it's been mentioned, like you said, in a few of the SONAs and that, but I'm not seeing any traction from it. We're not seeing the results of the money being spent. And that's, for me, problematic. Even with the Department of Small Business Development, I'm not really seeing exactly what they're doing. They mentioned a few number of small businesses that they've created or helped, etc., and it's not a lot of businesses. So it's a bit concerning that we're again pumping, similar to education, is that we're pumping a lot of the budget money into this, but we're not seeing the return. So somewhere along the line, something's going wrong, and that's what we need to be investigating.
You know, I'm not politically minded. I don't follow these things. In fact, I happened to be watching the SONA speech. I just clicked through it and then found it after watching the Big Small Business Show, which was very interesting. But what the SONAs in other countries, I mean, do they come back and talk about what has been done, in other words, results? Is it more results, or, because for me, every SONA that I have watched has been almost about the start of initiatives. It's always the beginning of initiatives, but never, and here's our results. So we were going for 10 out of 10, we got 9, we learned this. Am I right? I mean, you're giving me
I think it comes back to accountability. We don't have any accountability at this stage on any front of the money being spent and how it's been spent. And we've just done an analysis on some of the expenditure items in the budget, and we're looking at these expenses and saying why. For instance, on education, it's one of the biggest spends on our budget, yet we're not seeing the outputs. The classroom size, we've discussed those as well. The Department of Basic Education says it should be about maximum in terms of law 40 to 1, so 40 children to 1 teacher, yet we are hearing media reports of about 80, almost 100 children to 1 teacher. So how is that happening? And if you look at the Auditor General reports as well, some of these departments are getting more and more money, yet we're not seeing the output. So they've got qualified audit reports, they've got irregular expenditure, wasteful expenditure. How is that happening, and how are they getting more money every single year? I mean, we looked at the Department of Water and Sanitation. They spent 98% of the budget, but they only met, I think it was 43 or 48% of their targets. So why are they getting more money year on year when they're not actually doing what they're meant to be doing? How's that happening? And that's the question that I think we want Parliament to address, is we need to be a lot stricter with looking at the budgets and approving them for the following year. You can't approve it if you've got an unqualified audit, if you've got irregular expenditure or wasteful, unauthorized expenditure. How is that happening?
But what practically happens when you don't give the budget or don't approve the budget? What practically happens in that department when there's no budget allocated? You can't issue salaries, you can't pay suppliers, it becomes far more difficult in practice than, in theory.
One, accountability. What we've seen, for example, in models in New Zealand, what they do is they actually have freeze budgets. So there's no automatic increase in anything. You actually have the same budget as last year, and if you have higher salaries, you get to pay it out of somewhere else. And then they have surplus allocations where departments jointly apply to the fiscus to say your priority is X, we together need to deliver on X, and this is our proposal in spending the surplus. But at least you are then compelling them to get through efficiencies. Because I think that's the big thing. Small businesses are most affected by the lack of proper spending through government. And I think that's the problem. When we have this whole discussion with the wage bill, etc., in government, it's not about us spending more tax money on keeping jobs in the public sector. It's us spending money on keeping jobs in public sector that might cost us 2 or 3 jobs in the private sector. That's the debate. So are we spending money wisely in keeping people in jobs in the public sector? And small businesses, once again, we don't have a small business culture in South Africa. It's difficult to do, but even though there are opportunities. I mean, you mentioned SONA, I mentioned the fact that, for example, robotics. So now suddenly we want to roll out robotics in various grades. We are the robotics teachers, they aren't. So if you're in the IT field, etc., and you have a small business, in the interim, you might be able to sell these skills onto service providers, to the public sector or the education system.
If you get paid.
If you get paid, which is hopefully where the new preferential procurement bill, and that's the other thing we're seeing is centralization. So we saw the SONA mentioning centralization of all the funding agencies. So you had a myriad of funding agencies, both at national and provincial level and even local government level. Is that we're seeing centralization, all of that, but we're also seeing centralization in procurement. So hopefully on the centralized system that just deals with the procurement side, there will be some accountability to actually monitor the payment side. Which doesn't help they get procurement at less, but they're still not paying our smaller businesses when they do procure. But hopefully that will enhance. So centralizing that procurement and hopefully making it more efficient for small businesses to do government business.
And we've seen quite a bit talking about robotics and procurement. We've had on this show, it seems like the e-government, there's some sort of a momentum around e-government initiatives and that they're starting to actually work.
No, definitely. I mean, take that CIPC Biz Portal. It's fantastic. I mean, I even paid my rates and taxes as eTswane or whatever. It's fantastic. It really works very, very nicely.
Yeah.
So they're getting them.
And also being able to get your passports through the banks, you know, those kind of things. So there's some
driver's license,
lights at the end of the tunnel. We're just not quite sure if it's a train or not. But we're going to have to take a break down. When we come back, we're going to be talking about 2 things. We're going to try and look for the light, and we're also going to talk about Corona. You can't have a show today without talking about Corona.